Oh.
So, Mr. Shalef,
Yeah,
we are live.
nice.
So today, Andy's going to come out of the closet,
Yes,
and so am I.
nice. A lot of things are going to be revealed today. We're going to talk about
Our relationship.
And where are we going to do that, Bambos?
On a wonderful chaos, Mr. Shalef. On a wonderful chaos. So we started a bit early today because I was trying to play a practical joke on Andy, but it didn't really work.
Well, I mean, I could continue sleeping through the show if you'd like.
So if you guys have any questions about us, what goes on behind the scenes, this is the show to do it on.
Yes.
Mr. Bulelang, and JC and Chris Carell, if you're around.
Yep. Always happy to hear your questions.
Make them as complicated as possible. So you've been wanting to do this show or actually you introduced it because on our journey together, people have really projected a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they have projected a lot onto it.
Let me finish the sentence.
Yeah, I felt into it though. You said, yeah.
And almost people judging you for how you talk.
Sometimes, yeah, of course.
Has anyone judged me for how I am with you?
Have people judged you to me? Sometimes I've gotten people that said to me that they didn't feel like you were comfortable on the show.
Yeah.
And I got that a few. And I also got it from people that were on the
receiving end.
Receiving end, yeah. So I've heard that, but yeah, that's kind of the only thing I've really heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's say I'd like to acknowledge there have been moments on the show that I have not been comfortable, but that's also because I wasn't in a good place in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And just coming onto the show was a bit of a drag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what was interesting is before we began the show, one of the things I said to you, if you recall, was that, oh God, this is going to be such an idiot. Like, I'm going to have people out there seeing me talk to you on air and they're going to like say, what a jerk.
You already knew that beforehand.
Yeah, but I told you that before because I think what people don't understand, like people have a perception of the way individuals should interact with one another.
Should being the key word.
Should, yeah. So if in a way they'll look at our interaction, there would be a judgment about, oh, that isn't appropriate. And then they have a story around whatever they think that is. Like, I can tell you a story that I could hear them saying based on my assumptions, right? My projection back onto that projection.
I think in our I mean, you've been my mentor since the end of 2014, right?
Yeah.
Like we met, I think, mid 2014.
Yeah.
And I remember in the beginning of our relationship, we were sitting downstairs in your kitchen.
Uh-huh.
And you actually told me one of the reasons that you hang out with me or you put effort to be my mirror and my mentor was because when you would say something to me, I would rarely defend myself, which made it less energy consuming for you. That I would take it in and just kind of feel into where that would be true for me.
Yep.
And sometimes because I was not back then fully embodied, I might even take it in fully. And then you might be like, oh, actually, maybe that's not true.
Yeah.
So it's been that kind of dynamic. And
yeah. And this is where it gets finicky, right? Because a viewer might see that and say, oh, it's a unbalanced relationship. Andy is exactly. And that's the kind of projection that it would come in, of course. And I would say in some ways we can both agree that it is unbalanced.
Yeah.
But in other ways, it's like, you know, I like looking at things that are so complex that I don't even understand, like integral theory, which is just we don't need to go into it too much. But the one thing that I loved is that when he talked about like areas of enlightenment, then it would be people are more enlightened in areas than other people. So when it comes to body, when it comes to food, when it comes to lifestyle and being conscious of how you're living, you put so much more time and energy into that area that would be your domain.
Yeah.
And that would, and there would be no question of me to you to say, Bambos, you should do this, this, or this in the area that you've put your time and energy.
Yeah.
And where I've put my time and energy is a lot about interpersonal relations. So, and also on the show, we're dealing with that a lot more. So obviously that's more of a domain that I would, you know, try to hold the space more.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think what's kind of curious is what people don't know is, like, with questions that, you know, people will find that I'll ask a lot of the questions as we're doing our show, but that's not necessarily for lack of not wanting to have you ask the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that.
Well, not only you feel it after every show at the start when you were anxious, I would like, Bambos, why aren't you asking more questions, or what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's funny because in some ways it would be good even to discuss, like the show we did on Friday with Bob Shern, like part of the journey of helping and supporting you to just ask questions is not to know the question you're going to ask before you open your mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because you haven't really been telling me what to do.
Yeah.
So in general, I'm not very comfortable being in my head. And I've been judging being in my body for a long time. I always felt I was judging emotional intelligence as I am not intelligent. So I was trying to be this instead of fully owning this.
Yeah.
And you've been inviting me into the space where to celebrate this and allow the words to come out and formulate a question, even though I wouldn't per se really know what that question would sound like or be like. So you're talking about Friday. The Friday I just said, like, oh, this word is really vibrating in me, and I don't know what the right question would be.
Yeah.
But this word is really staying with me right now.
It was the word journey.
It was the word journey.
Yeah.
And then what was his name?
Bob Shern.
Bob answered, but it didn't go deep enough because my question was a bit too broad. So Andy took that and he built on that.
Yeah.
You already had that question anyway.
Well, what the thing was, what I find interesting is that in the, let's say if it's a talent or a skill you're building, you have to take risks. So when you use the word journey, I already had the word journey in my head, but not the word journey, because he specified a period of time from 13 to 30 or something. But 30, no, yeah. It wasn't Bob. That's my mistake. It wasn't Bob. It was the day before Bob. My bad. But regardless, what was curious was that you felt the same thing I felt. How you translate that into a question is something that evolves over time.
Yeah.
And you get better at it by doing it and trying it and seeing what works better and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And when you will ask, your question was so broad that the other person wasn't able to process it because they needed more guidance in terms of. So I think that's part of the balance. Is some people need more precise questions, and some people can kind of navigate even a very broad question. But it's riskier with a broad question if you kind of have a desire to hear something from a person.
Yeah, which I didn't.
No, exactly. Well, I do often when I ask questions, right? Meaning I'll set the context through the question, and then wherever they go with it, I don't really care. But I like to set the context clear. That's the idea.
I mean, during the show, I've used the show also to develop my own communication skills, like spending 1 hour every day with you.
Yeah.
And you being actually one of the few humans that I spend actually.
Well, I would ask you about the guest, because a lot of times the guest will be, I'm curious in how far have the guests that have come on also shaped your kind of development?
I would say pre-COVID, because we started before COVID, I was still judging people that were too much coming from the intellect.
Okay.
And I don't know if judgment's maybe judgment's a bit too strong, but it would be, I couldn't meet them there. I wasn't comfortable there. So it was more about me.
Yeah.
And through our journey together, and this is episode 130, I've stopped trying to be something, and I'm finding more the breath in my body and being more with them. In fact, you've said something really beautiful to me once. You said to me, Bambos, I'm just grateful that people give us 1 hour of their time to be with us. And when I tune into that, like 1 hour, and them not knowing what they're saying yes to, I could feel that gratitude. And it's only because of by you living and being that, that's inspired me to find that in my own self.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
And I don't think I would have been able to come to this as quickly as I could, because like I said, pre-COVID, I would tend to be, oh, this person's too heady, and I'd walk away from it, never showing myself.
Yeah, or using words like heady, and then they'd feel judged by it.
Yeah,
which we saw happen a few times. Yeah, and then and what I like is what I've seen, like you transition to, which I found really sweet, is that when a guest comes on, and I'll be interacting with them, and I'll try to I'll meet them where they are, often where maybe they have more of an intellectual way of expressing themselves. I'll see that you'll sort of pull it back. Yeah, you'll pull it back to, you know, hey, let me make this real. Yeah.
And let's just say the first episodes we did, at least half of them, the beginning, I still needed it to be an emotional, like I still want.
Yeah.
And if you look at at least the last 30 episodes, like 40, I'm still, I've let go of that. So it doesn't have to be emotional anymore. I pretty much see that some of my questions are not emotional anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That was another.
So the guest now doesn't feel that I need them to be something more than what they are.
Yeah, which is something that some of them went away with feeling early on, right? Yeah, that's fascinating. Because that would, I would say that we're talking about the show.
We actually discuss everything that we're talking about right now. This is how we would engage it.
Of course.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Like Andy might call me and say, hey, listen, or you message me Saturday, hey, listen, that question you asked was pretty good, for example.
Pretty good. I said it was really good.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
So behind the scenes, there's a lot of feedback, or you're like, oh, when you asked that question, I experienced this happen, and maybe you could ask it like this next time.
Yeah.
So, and I have to tell you, Andy, like every time you make time to send me a message, like there's also that deep appreciation that you make that effort. Because I have your calendar at home.
Yeah.
And I pretty much see how fucking busy you are.
Yeah, or not, you know, who knows?
Well, most days.
Yeah.
I love Raul's comment. Pre-COVID is post-flu.
Pre-COVID is post-flu. I don't know what the I don't know what the connection is. My brain isn't sometimes he speaks in riddles, and I need to have them more precise. He'll write it out for us. Yeah. I think sometimes when you'll see, there's been times on the show when I've been frustrated as well. Not recently. We're talking when we started.
Yeah.
That you weren't, for instance, you know, when you'd say, you know, either after the show, oh, Andy, I'm tolerating the show. I don't like being here, but I'm just showing up, or something like that. And
give some context though.
Yeah, help me with context.
The context was we did the show, and my business was doing really bad.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much running out of finances and not being able to generate work because I lost everything during COVID. So that was, I would say, like the fact that you put up with me in the beginning. Like
I wouldn't say I would put up with you.
Listen, I was showing up, and because I was in such a emotional state and not being really uncertain of the future, it was hard for me to be here.
Yeah, it was hard for you to be here. It was really,
and so sitting here and not owning where I was at, I wasn't talking about it. I would say, if I would use different words now, is I was suppressing. So I couldn't tolerate myself being here when I'm suppressed. And by the way, you did invite me in a few shows to talk about it, and we did.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if I invited you. I said, you have to. I mean, you have to talk about it. because the whole idea of the show is it to be whatever's present in either one of us on any given or at any given moment. So not to discuss it, right, or not to bring it forward, actually is it defeats the purpose of us doing this.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm curious. Bolalong says people who give us feedback are loving. I don't know if I'd say that.
I would say it depends on the context, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some people who I see just leave their baggage at my door because they don't really. They react to something in themselves that they're not aware of, and then they, like we had one person who wrote this comment. Everything you're saying is bullshit, and it was like, yes, everything we say is also bullshit, but. Like, is that like a loving comment with Bolalong? I would almost think to myself, that was someone who didn't give much thought to, what they had to say.
Yeah.
Or didn't care enough, let's put it that way, to write a little bit more context so that we could engage around it. It was very, categorical and not very open to a dialogue. Yeah.
We do, by the way, want to encourage more hate messages because we think that
we think that gets us going. The more people that hate us, the better the ratings.
The better the ratings.
Like we're really what do you say? Pushing the boundaries of discomfort. I think the thing is we don't take on topics that the whole idea of this session is for us to hear, listen to people, understand what their standpoint is, and not take a standpoint, not argue with them, not fight any wars, right? That isn't our programming. So in some ways, but Bolalong says bullshit is not loving. It's so vague. Yeah, that would be agreed there. Yeah. So but I guess the thing that I found curious about as we've evolved, I feel like the shows are better when you are connected, because in some ways you say, Andy, when we began, you needed it to be connected.
Yeah.
And then that energy is problematic because if you need something and we're in an interaction with another person, then they'll feel that need and then they won't necessarily feel grounded in their comfort because they'll feel like you're not meeting them where they are.
Yeah.
So now what I feel like I've noticed is that the need has gone away. You don't need it, but you still desire it.
Yeah.
And so that energy is totally clean. And that's where I see we get really deepening in on a lot of the talks we have, is that you're not imposing it, you're inviting it. And I see a lot of people will meet you, like Bob Shern, the district attorney, when you said, what are the qualities how people would describe you? Like you asked it in a general way, but in a way you actually created it. You made it very personal, and as opposed to us talking about serial killers for an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and I guess this kind of feedback, it's things that my brain takes for granted, but when you've told me, it kind of anchors it in me.
Yeah,
which is great.
And that's where, it's funny because sometimes I don't know if, for instance, your use of drugs for the period of time you've used it has impacted your ability to concentrate sometimes. Like
I have to say that I remember in school when I didn't understand something, I would get punished.
Okay.
And then when I was at home and I didn't understand something, I would get punished. Like I'd get a beating. At school, the teachers back then, they would hit us with a ruler.
Okay.
Like a long ruler and just hit you.
Yeah.
And like my brain's like, wow, that really happened. And nowadays, like you do that, you're going to go to jail.
Yeah. But how does that equate with what I was saying?
Well, somewhere when this was happening when I was 8 years old. So as an 8-year-old, I feel that it got the energy of understanding, like, oh, I don't understand, so get pushed, it gets suppressed. And I think in one of our shows with Chris Carroll, even, I discovered that I had emotional intelligence. So I used to cry a lot, and I never really, when I would cry, I never could put words, so I could just start crying when I was small. And then I could even get hit for that. And I never really found a way to understand what was happening, and I didn't really have access to questions back then. And of course, I didn't have also a mentor, so I just always thought something was wrong with me. So the drug addiction came later when I thought, okay, fuck it, let's end this.
Yeah. There's a lot of beauty that what you just said. I'm processing it all, because if I feel into it, you're kind of pointing to, it's almost like a PTSD, what we're talking about. Like, if confronted in a situation where there's an intellectual discussion you're not quite getting, instead of moving into a meta level space of trying to absorb it, like not even necessarily figure it out, but just absorb it, it's almost like your system doesn't allow you to do that. You go into this almost the fear, like, I don't get what's going on here and I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I notice, like, if I'm with someone who's speaking way beyond my capacity to understand, I'll step back and like kind of feel like, let me absorb this. I can't understand it. I'm not trying to, but let me absorb it. Let me feel like, what is it that the person is really saying here? And I see now, I believe, based on what you just said, we go through that process totally differently based on the fact that I don't have fear and uncertainty around it.
Yeah.
I think I've accepted, because I never thought myself to be very smart as a kid. So I both my brothers were really the smart ones, and I was the one that wasn't the smart one in the family.
Yeah.
I had to have the tutors and all the other kind of stuff. So I never felt, it wasn't obviously the situation you were in, but I never felt myself to be smart. But what I also didn't feel to be was to be smacked and hit around for not being smart. So it was a very different connection at a young age. Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can feel that. Like, it's almost, I know I'm 43 years old, but I can feel my body remembers what it's like to, oh, I don't know, so there must be something wrong with me. Oh, I'm getting punished. And of course, back then, I mean, look at the resources we have today. Back then is, oh, why don't you understand this? Like, you don't want to understand.
Yeah.
So that would be the motive.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to understand.
You don't want to understand.
Yeah.
So let's.
And then that goes into this negative reinforcing loop, right? Because if you feel bad about learning, you're not being even encouraged. You want to learn less. Like, it gets worse. Yeah.
So again, this moment that I've had with Andy is a kind of conversation. We've had these conversations also on the show, but we also would have it like this, is more in depth, where he explains to me right now how he would take in information when he doesn't understand something. And he just gave me, like, I loved how you took a step back also with your body. So I just made a mental note, okay, I'm going to practice this.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing is that I got the benefit of spending years with my mentor Case.
Yeah.
And if anyone saw the dynamic between he and I, like, it verged on a little bit more, I know what we call it, abusive. If we're going to use that word, someone from the outside would say, "Wow, he's really rough on Andy, right? He's not treating Andy with respect." But I was learning, growing. I could hold that tension. But what I also learned from that experience is that it held me back in a lot of regards, because he, and I feel, and I hope, and we have to validate, is different between the two of us, is that in some ways he wanted me to be a kind of embodiment of his understanding. It was like, this is the understanding. If you don't have the understanding, then you're not representing what we are all about. So I have to train you now on what we are all about. So there's a lot of chastising.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel like
we don't have that.
No, certainly not.
I've actually asked you to be like that with me.
I know you have. Yeah. And what I've sort of said, I don't know if you noticed my languaging to it. I get to decide how I want to live. It's my decision. And how I live has consequences. And others can hopefully see qualities and patterns in what I do and say, okay, I'm going to emulate that because there's something there that I feel like I'll benefit from. So I think what I shifted from in that dynamic with Case, and I haven't put it forward, is that Case really was saying, this is the way to live. And if you live this way, you'll have whatever enlightened experience that was so important to him. Where I've said, this is the way I've decided to live, and I can decide that for myself. And I invite others to sort of have a sense of what modeling some of my behavior would look like for them, which would be not all that dissimilar for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in our relationship, there's actually not many people, if not that I'll take into account in terms of advice.
Uh-huh.
And you rarely give advice, by the way, but like my body doesn't feel contracted when you're talking, even when you're communicating things which are difficult for me to listen to in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because the way I've experienced you, and we spend a lot of time together. I'm in the building a lot.
Yeah.
I spend time with you and your wife. So you're consistent in every area of your life, whether you're with clients, with friends, with me, with your, like, in everything. And that consistency, I trust you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can shout at me and I wouldn't hear the shouting. I'd hear the love behind the shouting. But that is because I see how you're living.
But have I ever shouted at you?
Have you?
No. I was going to say, you could shout at me.
Yeah, you could. But no, you never shouted at me.
I was going to say, that would be new for me.
You actually heard
Ronnie once told me I shouted at her.
You actually I came in the house a few weeks ago and I heard you shouting at Ronnie, and I'm like, practical joke.
That was the best. I was like, if I shout, maybe he'll believe that we're in the middle of a fight. And then you ran down laughing. Oh, wow. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I think.
And keep in mind, a lot of the people that we bring on, and they're connected to you in some way.
Yeah.
I'm getting to get to know you and your journey in a pretty beautiful way.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. Bola Long mentioned that on Friday's show. He shared that it's really beautiful that, like, how we connect to these old people that are in my life, and then they come on. There's some beauty to that, rekindling old relationships and having them, play out on the show.
Well, in January we have 2 people from my network, guys.
Oh, nice, yeah. Bola Long asked a really nice question. How do you shout at a person, Andy? It's interesting. I'm gonna funnily have quite a few caveats here. I've learned something really fundamental, is that I don't decide what shouting is. The other person listening does. So I might say, you know what? This is you're making me crazy. And that could be heard by another person as shouting.
Shouting could be abusive. So whatever you project onto it.
Whatever the other projects onto it. So so that's the first caveat here. So I don't feel like sometimes I'll shout, but I'll shout at nothing just to like let air out of my system. Like when you came in and I was just feeling, I'm just a bit tired. I just want to get it out. I was like, fuck da 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 da. And then Ronnie will look at me and laugh, because she already knows that it's just whatever. I wouldn't do that all that often, of course, but she knows me like you know me well enough to say whatever is going on, it's something,
yeah,
just playful. But I don't know. You know what I tend to do? Instead of shouting, I fester, and then I'll spend a half a day thinking of everything I wish I'd said or done, but I won't necessarily do it in that moment. Yeah. and I'll step away because we talked about it. I was listening to the show with Bolalang, actually, which was a really nice show. For those people, the podcast version is online. What I've noticed is that Bolalang in that show said, we had the discussion about arguments, I think the word. I don't know if it was arguments, it was another word. And
I'm sure he's going to correct us.
Yeah, of course he will, as he's listening. And what I said is that, and I was really confused why Bolalang said, he said he'd enter an argument. And it was just how we defined argument. Argument for me already defined as another individual not wanting to learn or listen or anything. So why would I enter that? So when a person doesn't really have any desire to connect and understand me, I look in the mirror and say, me wanting to convince them of anything is a dependency. I'm codependent on them. If I need them to understand me, there's codependency. So then I just leave. You know, if they mean more to me, I might tell them that, but a lot of times. So I don't get angry all that often or certainly not shout at a person. But there's an interesting thing. I think if you're capable of shouting at a person, this is a really funny thing. It's less likely to happen because people around you will feel that and then they don't trigger it in you as much. So you'll also notice in people that are abusive, the people around them will also not want to trigger the abuse. So they'll live in fear of that as well. That's also what happened with my dad, for instance. Yeah.
Okay, guys, that's the end of our show.
We talked about mentoring and coaching
on
last week.
Yeah, Thursday. Yeah,
that show got a lot of interest.
It did. Before it went live and
during
and after.
So if we talk about mentoring, coaching, how would you say I'm interacting with you in that regard? Do you say you feel more mentored or more coached, based on the criteria that we set out in that show?
I don't remember the difference, actually.
The difference would be
I think you're more mentoring, the way we demonstrated on the show.
It's more mentoring,
like asking me questions and allowing me to come to my own conclusion, and without you needing it to be different. So we've also talked about on the show, you might be asking a question to someone, but that question is carrying the energy that you need it to be something, or you're trying to guide them somewhere. Yeah. And I've never had that with you.
Yeah, or I make it transparent.
Yeah,
you'll say, I have a prejudice here. Remember, like when we had Shane on, the artist, the dark arts artist, and he was an Asian adopted kid, and like I already saw, just by him being Asian and adopted, I already had this picture in my mind that he was born, like he was adopted by this really religious family and all that kind of thing. So like instead of me pretending like I don't have that going on in my head, I get the pleasure of saying, okay, let me paint the whole prejudice I have in my head so that I just can laugh at it or see it validated.
Yeah.
And it was validated, of course, by him. But I think that's part of the problem in society today, is that we have thoughts, we have ideas, we have projection, and we feel like we're not allowed to have those because we'll be judged for it. And then in that process of judging, what happens is we actually struggle in ourselves, we self-sabotage and judge and all that shit. And then that leads us just to becoming shameful, and we go nowhere. So I'd rather say, hey, there are these thoughts I have. They're not necessarily right or wrong, but they're there. So let's have fun and celebrate them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Our relationship has evolved, though, through the years.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, but what would you say because I kind of have critical moments.
When we first met, I really saw you as we had this relationship. Like you were here and I saw you I was looking up to you.
Yeah.
And on our journey, the looking up is not there anymore. There's more respect.
Nice.
And there's more love, but you
don't idolize.
No.
That's nice.
You're still dad.
Yeah, but that makes me feel better than any compliment you can give me.
Yeah,
because I've noticed in relationships a lot, when people elevate another person, then at some point the other person doesn't live up to the expectation, and then resentment shows up.
I elevate you when I talk to other people.
I got that.
But whatever they want to project in, like, I elevate you. I just talk about your books, your journey,
Sure.
how you interact, what you're doing, and if they want to project more onto that, like a friend of mine said, "Oh, you're a guru," or
Yeah.
like.
Exactly. Whatever.
I never use that word. So
yeah, I think there's oftentimes when people see others being influenced by another person, if they themselves are feeling like they don't want to give up the agency over themselves, they'll judge that.
Or they've had a bad experience.
Or they've had a bad experience. Very good point. Which I've seen happen a lot as well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to share that point though.
Go on.
Was that what I found really sweet?
Did you see how he interrupted me, everyone? That's abusive.
I thought you interrupted me, by the way. And once we go 2 interruptions, I won't remember damn word we were supposed to talking about. In fact, I've already forgotten it, so let's continue.
Fuck.
It was this. It was that. So once someone's put on a pedestal and then you've spent time around them, what I've found out or I've seen throughout my life is that there's a resentment that kicks in the moment that the person doesn't live up to the expectation. And so what I find nice is that in our relationship, that existed, it still may in some ways exist, which is fine, because I look the same way up to you when it comes to fitness and health and dedication and determination. So it's not as if it's a one-sided coin on that one. But I guess the idea being that if I look at it, that we transitioned from you being more elevating me to you more equalized, and that there was no real like need to fight. There was no struggle of power of who has what or knows what more than like that. It was just, no, you're an equal the moment you act as equal. Yeah.
I mean, you can also, I think, and you can correct me if you see our dynamic on the show, if you're talking more, I don't feel that you're inferior to me.
Nice.
Like, I just feel at peace being here with you. And a lot of the times if I'm not talking, it's because I don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
And I would even say that you've invited me to be more comfortable with that. Like, why fill up the silence if...
Yeah. Or say, basically, I mean, sometimes you've said it and I've kind of cringed a little bit because the guest, I didn't know how they were going to take it. When you just say, I'm just bored. Sometimes you've done that. I'm like, oh, that's a little bit too. You could frame it, still say what you want to say without necessarily making them maybe feel uncomfortable that there was a bad show or something,
Yeah.
But still, I was happy you did it. And I like Bolalang and is a guru who doesn't know he is one. I think he's talking about himself.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
Like the way you live, like the way you process the world, like, and this is a bit edgy to say it on air, but fuck everyone that judges it. Like, I do see that you are enlightened, and you would never claim that word because it's a fucking label. But just to point.
But what would you say? Because stop if you don't use the word, but say, what are the qualities you believe to see that you say, oh, that's what you would associate enlightenment with? What is that? Because that's where it's impersonal. Enlightenment can be confusing.
The word that comes to me is you're someone that lives with peace and surrender, even in moments in your life, like last year and the year before, when you've had you were hit by the belastingdienst, and where I would have seen other people like fall on their face, get depressed, fight back aggressively, give back energy. I just saw how you aikidoed, and aikido is the art of allowing it to move, and you were breathing, and you weren't suppressing anything. I never saw you pretending. You were just, oh, this is painful. And there was this beautiful, like, you always talk about paradoxes.
Yeah.
It's painful, and yet I can find peace in it. So you were surfing these huge waves, Andy. And I was like, how the hell is he doing this? And I remember did take energy because you're human, and yet when the right moment came, I saw you taking action. It was more a practical action.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful. And again, when you were taking that practical action, even though you got the upper hand at that point, I would say, I didn't see you being spiteful or fuck them.
Yeah.
Or like, it was with the same energy that you didn't change.
No, I understood. It was also
I would say you were love in both polarities.
Yeah, I think I see the world outside of me as another reason to meditate. Like, oh, there's something in here that I'm not able to make peace with. It's a gift of trying to see what it is that I'm still holding on to. And as I always say, it almost always goes back to death. Because if I can make peace with death, then basically everything else is just, because, hey, non-existence, like, can you imagine me taking this shit that seriously when all of a sudden I know that's the end thing is nothingness, that's it for me, right?
Yeah.
Bola Lung is very nice. He's prepping us with your book. The book, see, that was the thing that happened for me, right? After Case died, I wrote a book to memorialize him, and no one found him all that interesting. So I basically started writing more about my own journey. Kind of a fascinating journey with writing a book about, and I don't know if you remember that story, but I only wrote about my life to prepare to write about Case's life. It was like warming up. Oh, I can write about my own life. That's easy. Da, 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 da. And then I like gave people the draft, and then they found that. So yeah.
Well, he already wrote about his life. 2 books, Bulalan. Come on. You don't need my perspective.
Yeah. Well, that'll be the work you do after I'm gone, so that you can sort of find your own path again, right? Or you wouldn't write a book per se, that you do something else. So we were talking a little bit about incremental steps in terms of our journey.
Yeah.
And I think, we've used the word a lot, and I find it really important when coaches or trainers are working with people, is that to what degree do they give up you agency, meaning the ability to decide on your own destiny, your own choices and decisions? And to what degree does that become a problem with you living your own life, because now somebody else, in a way, has control over you, whether you know it or not?
Yeah.
And I think in a dynamic like the one we have, you could say agency has shifted over time. You when we began, you didn't have, I took the agency away from you.
I remember.
I didn't let you have it.
I was a wild man. I was angry all the time, potentially violent. Like, I was a monster. Like, I want to exaggerate it. Like,
you raged, but you didn't rage physically on anyone. You raged. You destroy your apartment and break everything in it just to let out your energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let's distinguish between physical violence and just like raw childhood inability to integrate emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So during that time, you did put boundaries, and that was really good for me.
Yeah. And one has to also understand, during that time, I wasn't getting paid for anything. So, it was like, you came, you had the desire. I of course, every hour I spend coaching you is an hour I'm not working and making money from someone who would pay me.
Yeah.
So we also have to get clear, it wasn't like, oh, I'm doing this because I got some big business vision out of it, right?
Yeah.
So and if everyone in my life felt entitled to my time and I gave it to them, then I would just be self-sacrificing.
Yeah. And so in a lot of ways, I've also told you this, you kind of saved my life. Because the way I was going, I don't know where I was going, but it wasn't looking like a bright future.
Yeah. Thank you. That's beautiful. I made some brownie points when I get to heaven at the Golden Gates. I'll say, talk to Bambos. He's my reference. Let me in. I guess then the reason why I say that is because the dynamic changes over time, because as the coach, mentor, whatever the role would be, I would then say there's less and less I need to, it's almost like if I would say, if you're driving a car and then the kids in the car, and then you got to put a bumper on the left and the right,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the space in which they can drive without hurting anyone. Like the bumper I put was really tight when we began. Like, I'm not going to work with you unless violence stops. I remember we talked about once before on the show. If there's any form of violence, our relationship is over. You don't even need to call me to tell me. Just don't call anymore, and that's it. Like, that's that.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a very simple. That's the criteria. If I'm going to give you free services, then this is. I'm not going to. I have zero tolerance because I just don't have the time and energy for this.
Yeah.
And then from there, it
So
evolved.
Let me just add something to that. So there have been moments during that time where I felt so fucking angry.
Mm.
And I would call him like, I'm angry right now. And he's like, okay, so just take a deep breath. And what's behind the anger?
Mm.
And I have never in my life had someone, I can cry right now, Andy.
No.
Hold that space and invite me to feel the pain behind the anger. Because I would call you, it's a problem, I'm angry. So what the fuck do I do now? And you'd be like, what's behind the anger? And what was behind the anger was an inability to feel that pain. And the anger was a reaction. And because I would go straight to anger, I never had the opportunity to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
So how it plays out in my life right now, if I even feel like 1% angry, it's like, oh, I'm in pain right now. It goes so quick that I don't have to think about it.
Yeah. And I think that's what happens through discipline in a mentor, right? Like I always laugh because I always think, any fitness coach, it's like any fitness coach, even if they suck, is good because they get you to go to do fitness. Like, you lose weight because you go there, right? So the humor is that in some ways, in this case you just mentioned, just saying, these are the rules, and now you have to be disciplined around them if you want to, in this, either lose weight for the physical or discipline yourself so you don't follow in the same patterns. Because change sucks. Like, there's simple things we do which are so pattern programmed that to not do them requires a lot of energy at the start.
Yeah.
So when you would say, hey, I would feel the anger. I remember, like, the funny thing, because you were in a relationship as well with someone, and I got, connected to the two and to the other party as well. And the one thing I said is, you're not allowed to, what was the
to push away or to run away.
You're not allowed to push or run.
Flight or fight.
No flight or fight. That was it. Yeah.
And again, just like anger, I had the opportunity to. So when I said no, you forced me to say no.
Yeah.
Like, let's put that straight. I had to say no to flight or fight, which was my go-to. So when I didn't do that, I just ended up crying for like hours.
You did that for like weeks, actually.
Hours in a time and weeks. And until I was ready for the next step, which I don't even remember anymore.
Well, I think the next step was that you saw you could talk about it.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't know the most obvious step that no one knows, right? It's like, oh my God, I can just say this isn't working for me, and I don't need to be angry about it. I don't need to fight it. I don't need to not talk to it.
So in my relationship, I would blame the other person for behaving a certain way.
Yep.
And because I loved them so much, I didn't want to lose them. But the space where I was invited to be and the discovery was, oh, actually, I'm trying to make something work and I'm getting frustrated all the time. So when I was able to commit, this doesn't work for me, she tried to meet me there, but it didn't work for her at some point.
Yeah.
And then the end of the relationship was a very beautiful one, because we had a ceremony that Andy facilitated.
A conscious uncoupling ceremony.
A conscious uncoupling.
I was like Gwyneth Paltrow. But the beauty is that neither of you did the fight or flight. It didn't make it any easier, because emotionally it can be harder. But it's like you stayed.
It's more easy to say fuck you.
It is.
It's more easy to say fuck you, make the other person a bad person,
vilify them.
But in this way, it's like, oh fuck, I love this person and I'm saying goodbye.
Yeah. Painful. And let's also agree, going forward, I'm not superimposing this on any of your future relationships. I did it on this one because I needed you to see the experience of how it could be different, because you didn't even have that as a perspective of difference.
And now I have the perspective.
Yeah. And I think the important thing in life is, if one hasn't had the experience, they don't even know what the difference would look like.
So you held the space for contrast.
Yeah. And that's beautiful, is because contrast is a big word that we haven't used on the show very much, but it's a big word.
Contrast.
Yeah. And I think like if I look at a really good coach or a mentor, then what they'll do is they force contrast, because if it's just a little different, if the contrast isn't really clear, it's really hard to learn the lesson in a different behavior. So you'll notice sometimes when I'm coaching someone, we did it on the show actually for the coaching and mentoring, I'll emulate behavior so that the other person can feel how it feels to receive that.
Yeah. Yeah. In that respect, you have shouted at me.
Oh yeah, exactly. In that respect, I have shouted at you.
Yeah, he did.
In the training, though,
but it was more to emulate what if you were doing me, actually.
I was doing you. I gave you what it feels like to be on the other side of you.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying, is that part of the beauty of life is that, in a way, if you just see you're is just this vessel, and there's emotions, but you can pull out an emotion to experiment with it and give an experience, and then another person can say, that's a contrast that helps me better understand how it feels to receive that. Because I remembered when you said, you often felt like anger and really strong anger, right? We don't put it into violence, because violence might be associated with a physical harming another, but like anger to the point where it's rage, right? To scary.
It was suffocating.
That for another person, you often couldn't understand why was it such a big deal for them at the beginning. Like, why are they making a big deal out of this? You mentioned, of course, a few times that that's what you were raised with.
Yeah.
It's like like a fish in water. What do you mean? Isn't this normal for everyone?
Yeah.
And
I mean, speaking to my sister's son, he also shared with me, like, in my culture, it's a very normal way of upbringing. Like,
did he have the same experience?
He had similar experiences, and he shared with me, and I'm not sure if he's comfortable with me saying that, but so I'm not going to go into detail because it was in confidence. But in general, when I go back and I talk about it, it feels like everyone has a blackout. Like, people like, I wasn't like that.
Oh yeah.
And then I just realized, wow, okay, yeah. It wasn't like that. And of course, I don't blame them.
No, I know what you're saying, though. But isn't it interesting how that works?
Yeah.
No different than when I was interacting with you, and you'd say, "No, it's not that big a deal. Don't make it." I think there's a lot. If they were to accept that it had that impact on someone, that would be pretty painful for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in the beauty when someone sees the show and they're watching the two of us, there is a degree to which I'll set the frame of each show, because from a marketing point of view, I usually have a very good kind of gauge of how do we want to position the show so that we frame it wherever we're going to go.
Yeah.
And the few times I've asked you if you want to do it, you've been like, just go for it. But in the last few shows, you've taken the reins every so often.
Yeah. As we go along, I see I can take that space.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a topic that excites me, like today.
Yeah. And I remember there was that one talk we had. Remember that one where we talked where I would have been considered a real jerk by anyone listening?
Which one?
It was when you called me and I would tease you on the show. I would say something. I don't know what, like, what would I say? What did I say to you? I don't know what it was. Something.
I really don't know.
But you remember the call or no?
The call?
The phone call you made to me. It was like after a show.
Oh yeah. I said to you, I wasn't comfortable. But I hope you remember also that I wasn't wanting you to be different. It was more just saying this is happening for me.
Oh, okay.
Are
you sure? Because I think I heard the wording, and this is, we're everything in the, is that, Andy, I would prefer you not do this. I think that was the wording I remembered. I'd prefer you not projecting onto me.
Oh, at some point I said, like, I was just checking in with you if it's this one. Like, you do know that I've changed, right?
Yeah.
Like, and if you know that I've changed, then you don't have to try to hold me there all the time by repeating that every show.
Yeah. And so the hold me there, those would be the wording that I would stick to. So so I said, in the case of if we're on the show, then the interaction around that is the purpose of the show. That was the whole. So if, for instance, I projected onto you or do an old idea of Bambos, right? Then the whole idea is, Andy, what makes that you continue to project onto me? Because I don't feel that way anymore. Like that would be the dynamic on the show.
Yeah.
And so when we talked off air, I was like, no, like that's not. We don't decide off air. We do this on air.
Yeah.
Like that's the purpose. Is like, Andy, what makes that you project onto me on this over and over again, whatever it is?
Yeah, and what makes you project onto me?
Because a lot of times you act and behave in a certain way. Okay, I haven't seen what Bolong says. Don't forget to tell us about the lolly on the background and the invite banner for the show. So that's a good one. That's a good one. He's asking, for those who may or may not know, the banner for this had 2 lollipops. And I saw those 2 lollipops and it was our relationship. So I thought, this is just sweet. Like I've got to take 2 lollipops. And this one just looked better on the camera.
I like the spiral also. Yeah,
I find the spiral very attractive. But I think the reason for the lollipop is because I felt, when I think about our relationship, a lot of sweetness. So I do feel like there's love and nurturing there. So I think that's why I lend towards lollipop.
Yeah, I let Andy pick the backdrop for the show. I was like, it's going to be like Sugar Daddy show.
Yeah.
We're like, let's out with our relationship, Andy.
Yeah. Everyone, of course, with Case and I, my mentor again, everyone assumed because I called him my partner, they always saw us together. They said they must be gay. Like I had so many people ask me if I was gay during that period. It was just wild. You and your partner, right? And not many people think that we're gay, but a lot of people think you're gay.
I can see why they would say that.
Why do you think they'd say that?
Because I'm quite relaxed as a man.
Okay.
Yeah.
They also just look at how shabbily I take care of my body and say, no straight man would be that, no gay man would be that disregarding their physical appearance. Yeah, but we've had a little bit of that between us, but not much.
Yeah. We have 3 more minutes of glory.
Yeah. There's a few other items I was thinking about that, you will often, although there's not that many years between the 2 of us, you'll often sort of project, I would say, a lot of the love, support, and the things you would have loved to have had from your family from me. So in a weird way, I often feel like I represent the idyllic version of the kind of father or a family figure that you would have wanted in your life.
I see you as family, full stop. Like in this part of the world, living in Holland, and even though at this time in my life, I talk to my family every week. We're quite close, and there's a lot of love. But in terms of family, friendship, you're a family that I've chosen.
Yeah,
and on our journey together, the amount of support that you've given me to be the man where I am today, who I am today. I just see myself like this. How can I make your life easier in whatever respect? And like when we talk about the term giving, and it doesn't even feel like an exchange. I want to give something back to you, but it just feels like your family.
Yeah.
Full stop. And I also feel like that with Ronnie.
If I were to die, right, then, in my case, when my mentor Case died, he in some ways held me back, right? Because he needed me to, in some shape or form, be a lot in a replica of what he was and how he was. That was really important to him in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
This is the gift I want to give the world, and I need other people around me to totally understand it, which was beautiful. And I actually served that gift to the degree I could. But the question for you is, in what way, if any, would you say if Andy was to die, I might even go further than where I'm now capable of going because of him in my life.
I don't see you holding me back. I do see, like on this show, because you're sitting next to me, you do hold the space. And when I've given a workshop like authentic relating and you've been in the room, I'm self-conscious of you being in the room. But when you're not there, I just hold the space.
Yeah.
But I see that as something that I do and not per se something that you impose. And like you said in the last few shows, I've also been taking the reins a little bit more. So I don't really see you holding me back in any way.
Yeah.
And if you are, then fuck you.
I think that's kind of interesting because what you just said, I often had with again Case, was that if I was doing something and he came in the room, I'd feel self-conscious because I'd always think there are things that he saw and did and understood that I didn't. So there was a little bit of self-consciousness, like, wow, I might be screwing this up. But if he's not in the room, I still might be screwing it up, but no one else would know because I'm the one holding the space, right?
There's two things. I celebrate when I screw up. So now in my workshops, screwing up is part of life, part of the process. But actually, the reason I'm like that is because you've held that space for me to celebrate that.
Yeah.
Like, fuck it up, take that risk.
Yeah.
And I would even dare say that I'm a good facilitator because of those qualities.
For sure. And
when you are in the room, like, I'm hoping that you're in the room sometimes because, like, okay, I can fucking learn something.
Yeah.
Because no one actually, or people are my mirror, but no one's gonna give it to me the way that you do, which is a little bit more. I would say I can do something with it.
Yeah, I'd say what I try to do is give you a principle understanding.
Yeah.
I don't say this is right or this is wrong. No, this is what the consequence of doing it is some way. I think this is possibly the most important message that Bolalang has ever written on any of our shows. Bambos, initially, I did think you as either gay or a metrosexual.
Yeah.
I know, Bolalang.
Bolalang, you're not my type.
Yep. But he's a pretty good looking guy. He's got a few kids out there.
I like longer hair.
Oh, wow. Well, we came to our hour, Bambos. Our relationship, that was an hour dedicated to our relationship. I don't know if anyone will still understand it. And yet now they at least have a chance.
Yeah. So do you want to bring up the shows for this week?
Do we want to? Or do we just tell people that there's shows next week? Come and check it out.
This week.
This week. Yeah. What are our shows this week? This week we've got...
We have like always consistency on our weeks. My kids divorce me.
My kids divorce me tomorrow, right? Yeah. We've got My Kids Divorce Me. On Wednesday, we've got The Ugly Side of Motherhood.
Like, what the hell?
I mean, these are just coincidental, right? On Thursday, we've got
she's one of my people.
The Discipline of Joy. Someone who says joy is not something that just happens. You need to dedicate to it.
I love it.
And we got Kevin Kopjak, and he met his birth mom at 40 after being adopted. So we're going to discuss what that looks like to meet your mother after all those years. Like, how is that dynamic? It just fascinates me. So,
and in January, because we're going to take a 2-month off, and second week of November.
Yeah.
So we're back second week of January, and that's going to be and one of the shows is my birthday.
Yeah.
And we're still trying to figure out, but actually my dad left when I was 15 and I found him when I was 30.
Wow.
And then he died 2 months later.
No.
Yeah.
You found him purposely, or he found you because he was going to die?
I had been looking for him.
Okay.
And we had telephone contact in the time I was looking for him. So when I was 29 years old, I went to Cyprus. I finally found him. We had a phone call. And when I went to Cyprus and we actually met, I saw that he was still the person I remember him to be.
Wow.
And instead of in my mind back then, instead of connecting to me as to, hey, we're here, he started to blame my mother.
Oh yeah.
I didn't have the awareness to hold that space for him.
Yeah.
And I was actually quite pissed at him.
Yeah.
And I left Cyprus. We didn't see each other again. I left Cyprus. We had a couple of phone calls where he asked for money. And I just told him, Dad, I'm going to be in Cyprus in a few months. Let's just meet, but I'm not going to give you money. And he just died before I had the chance to see him again.
Yeah.
But I was happy I did get to see him.
Yeah. Wow. That'll be dedicated. You mentioned that story because it's your birthday, and that's part of the story of your birthday?
No, because the guy found his mother when she was 40.
Oh, and you found yours when you were 30. Yeah. Except he was adopted, right? He never knew his mom. Not that matters, but we're going to do all of that and much more
on
Wonderful Chaos.
On a Wonderful Chaos.
Bye-bye. See you then.
See you then.